the leaves of life and the falling of the leaves of life. What about the Aeneid and Virgil's great poem? And you'll remember that it will be the Sibyl who is going to mess around with leaves. Only now, here, leaves we're not talking about off of Ruthie's tree, for example, that fall in October, November, but rather the leaves of a book, right? And, of course, all the prophecies that are there. Now, of course, we have Aeneas who is being encouraged. Once ashore, and here I'm in book 3 of the Aeneid, roughly lines 445 to 452. Once ashore, when you reach the city of Cumae, and of course, Avernus' haunted lakes, and murmuring forests, there you will see the prophetess in her frenzy, the Sibyl, chanting deep in her rocky cavern, charting the fates, committing her vision to words, to signs on leaves. Whatever verses the seer writes down on leaves, she puts in order, sealed in her cave left behind. There they stay, motionless, never slip from sequence. But the leaves are light, and if the door turns on its hinge, the slightest breath of air will scatter them all about, and she never cares to retrieve them, flitting through her cave, or restore them to order, join them as verses with a vision, so visitors may depart deprived of her advice, and hate the Sibyl's haunts. We, of course, love the Fagel's translation here, and again, we've given full lectures on these lines. I'm just wanting to point out to you all of the different ways Leaves of Grass is playing a game. What about our Dante? How about this one in book 3? We'll spend a few moments now in book 3, starting at around line 93 or so. We're working, of course, with Pinsky's translation. Again, I've given full lectures on this at Learn Strong, but I love to come back to this as they will then approach Charon and the old man in a boat, white-haired as he drew closer, shouting at us, "Woe to you, wicked souls! Give up the thought of heaven. I come to ferry you across into eternal dark, on the opposite side, into fire and ice. And you there, leave this place, you living souls. Stand clear of these who are dead." And then, when he saw that I did not obey, by other ports in a lighter boat, he said, "You will be brought to shore by another way." My master spoke then. Now, let's just point out, we are referencing, of course, boats. So here's Whitman's genius as he's putting all this together. Now we got Virgil, Charon, do not rage. Thus is it willed, where everything may be simply if it is willed. Therefore, oblige and ask no more. That silenced the grisly jaws of the great ferryman of the livid march, who had red wheels of flame about his eyes. We saw this, of course, in the previous poem about the flame in the eyes. But at his words, the forlorn and naked souls were changing color. Pay attention, by the way, to the genius of Whitman in color. Cursing the human race, God, and their parents. Of course, as we point out in our lectures on Dante, the resentment that is such a part of those in hell, who always want to blame everybody else except taking personal responsibility, and there they are. But now, and it's such a powerful image of the lost souls, teeth chattering in their skulls, they called curses on the sea, the place, the hour of their own begetting, in their birth. With wails and tears they gathered on the evil shore that waits for all who don't fear God. There demon Charon beckons them with his eyes of fire. Crowded in a herd they obey, and if she should summon, he strikes at any laggards with his oar, as leaves in quick succession sail down in autumn until the bough beholds its entire store fallen to the earth. So Adam's evil seed swoop from the bank when each is called as sure as a trained falcon to cross to the other side of the dark water. We think, of course, of Yeats' Second Coming with the falcon reference. And before one throng can land on the far shore, on this side, new souls crowd. Our Dante comes. How about this one? We, of course, love our Milton in 303. You'll remember, and of course, we have to remind ourselves of the importance of leaves as it plays out with Milton. What about in book 1, though? Do you remember these sets of lines? Natheless, He so endured till on the beach of that inflamed sea he stood and called his legions. Of course, we've given full lectures on this set of lines elsewhere at learnstrong.net. Angel forms who lay entranced, thick as autumnal leaves that strew the brooks in Vallombrosa. Of course, we're speaking now about references in Italy and these trees and the beautiful leaves falling in Vallombrosa. The idea then of leaves falling in certain kinds of ways, leaves as symbolic in certain kinds of ways. We, of course, have to think as well, though, about our Shelley. And one of our most important poems in 303, Ode to the West Wind. And the final section of Ode to the West Wind, go back and look at our lecture at learnstrong.net. Remember the request that Shelley will make at the conclusion of this classic ode. Make me thy lyre. He's speaking, of course, to the west wind, even as the forest is. And then he asks it, what if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet, though in sadness. And here, I think, is part of that melancholy that we were referencing earlier. Be thou spirit fierce, my spirit. Be thou me, impetuous one. Well, so much of this set of lines we'll come back to again and again as we get ready to study our Whitman. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. Be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. And then, of course, the famous lines that many of you have put on pieces of paper next to a bed or a dorm room bed or a wall to remind you, oh wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Clearly, Whitman is playing a similar kind of game here. Of course, we have to think about our biblical references as well, just to pick one from the biblical text. Isaiah 46, all flesh is grass. The idea that in the end we have the juxtaposition of leaves and grass. Now, of course, grass was also a term that was used in publishing. Whitman himself a publisher. That is to say, the useless, the refuse, the grass, all of it is here. He says, bear forth to them folded by love, dear mariners, for you I folded here in every leaf. Speed on my book, as we would say about a boat. Spread your white sails, notice the adjective, little bark, athwart the imperious waves. Notice this imperious, the challenging waves, right? Chant on, sail on. Notice your repetitions. Bear o'er the boundless blue from me to every sea. The inclusivity again of the vision. This song for mariners and all their ships. And we can't help but think of Dry Salvages, the third of the four quartets of T.S. Eliot, who struggled, of course, with Whitman all his life, and yet fundamentally was so influenced by... we've argued in 303 with our lectures on T.S. Eliot's four quartets. You can't read four quartets without Whitman being there in your mind. You'll remember in those lines from Dry Salvages, where is there an end of them, the fisherman sailing into the wind's tail where the fog cowers. We cannot think of a time that is oceanless, or an ocean not littered with wastage. We're playing similar kind of games. Well, what are we going to say about this genius little poem as we finish? Well, obviously a 2A for messages here. The artist obviously must have hope of the endurance of his or her creation if there is going to be any real reason to create in the first place. We think about Keats and the struggle, when I have fears that I may cease to be, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Keats, who had on his own tombstone, here lies one whose name is written water, who had that struggle that Whitman had, but Whitman didn't die young like Keats. Think of that. He lived to be an older man and to see finally that people would accept, embrace some, if not all, of Leaves of Grass. But you've got it. I mean, that's a huge, huge message here for us. Obviously, we've said it to the anaphoria, the repetition of first words. We're going to see this a lot in Whitman. The symbolism of leaves and grass and the allusions to so many literary texts. Isn't that an amazing thing, how he can play that game? And I've only scratched the epidermis, guys. I mean, we could play this game all the way through so many of our stories that will play around with it, right? I mean, Spring and Fall by Hausman. I mean, there's just so many titles that we could play around with at that point. At 3A, well, we've mentioned so many titles, we'll not go through them all again. Finally, at 3B, how about this one? What is a project that you have been engaged with, or through, that you've hoped for success, you've prayed for success, that maybe in fact it would linger on long afterwards? Like what has that one been for you? Well, I hope this is a set of lines that is challenging you to want to come back and enjoy some more talks with Walt. Thank you.